Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. This is me, Dukect, and I have a special guest here. One of the most prolific YouTubers out there who has released in many books. Also talking about serious issues like the Man Crisis, and also his other books, including the ISIS series. Just a really prolific author. One of the most interesting YouTubers, like myself, but here you are, ladies and gentlemen. Me, Dukect, with Shawn James. Say hello, man.
Hi, glad to see everybody, and thank everybody. Thank you for having me on the show.
No problem, no problem. It is a honor to talk to you, man. And I emailed you about, since you were, I saw your Twitter, you're talking about pro wrestling and seeing how things. And I wanted to say, let me get your thoughts on pro wrestling, the state of it right now, because it's a really exciting time. I mean, you have AEW and the moves WWE's doing with NXT. You got Impact Wrestling going to AX TV. You have all this stuff. And NWA Power just showed you stuff, the videos and such as well. What is your main thoughts of what's happening in the pro wrestling scene and such?
I think we're at a turning point in the world of wrestling, and the competition we're having is very good for sports entertainment, because with the competition, we are starting to see a lot better quality matches, and we're seeing a lot of diversity in the talent, because a lot of the talent with the WWE having that monopoly for so long was stalling and stagnating, and now we're starting to see a lot of superstars grow in all these different divisions and different companies.
Oh, yeah. And one thing I actually really liked about that is the change in in the shakeups of what's going on. I mean, for the longest time, you felt like it's just become too predictable. And when they had, there were some stuff like Impact Wrestling or TNA, whatever they want to call themselves, back in I think it was 2010 or 11, they tried it. It just didn't work when they tried to go against the Monday Night Wars. Back then, and now I think the reason why I see the way it's been doing, because I think it's the stability of the behind the scenes, but also again, like you said, the talent, which uh, you saw. Well, I just saw just after AEW just finished. I saw again. Hangman Page, Sammy Guevara, with also veterans of Kenny Omega and Chris Jericho. And you see that type of mix and that diversity and such um, in that type of pool, and people are gravitating towards that. And I honestly think that's a good thing.
It is a very good thing, because you're seeing a lot of the veteran talent working with the younger talent, and that leads to us getting better matches. And when you have the veteran talent helping develop the younger talent, we get to see them start to actualize their potential, and we get to see the veterans show how their talent has grown over the years.
Yeah, and when you look at, well, I want to just say this though is, what is your, when you look at all of them, what do you think which show right now is having the ahead? When you look at it, okay, which one do you think is pulling away, and which one do you think needs to, you're like, okay, this is a new era, you need to step it up. What do you think? What company is doing the best work right now?
Well, right now, AEW is doing some of the best work. I see a lot of heart in that wrestling. I see a lot of passion on the stage in the ring, and I see a lot of really great talent there. When it comes down to talent, creatively, AEW has really good talent, and it has a lot of those elements that make for great storytelling in the ring. You have really wrestlers who love what they're doing, and you can see it from the way they are from the way they work in the ring, and you can see a lot of the action there, and also the storytelling there is some of the best I've seen in years. It reminds me of old NWO era WCW, where the storytelling was just some of the best so far, and old school WWF wrestling, from that rock and wrestling era and that attitude era. So AEW is pretty solid. And I have to say that NWA, from what I've seen, is a close second. I mean, they are a smaller, looks like studio based wrestling group, but the wrestling there is very solid, the storytelling is there, and then the heart is there. The one that really has to work on, as I see it now, is WWE right now, because they are just not where they should be. A lot of the performances there are really bland. There's no real chemistry between the performers and the feuds, and the booking really does not really bring out the talent the way it should be brought out. A lot of teams like Viking Raiders aren't being booked very well. I mean, even though they got the tag belts, they're just not being put into a feud to really show us why we should care about them. And the championship picture is a really muddled one. It just doesn't actively get you engaged like Attitude Era's Rock and Stone Cold, or John Cena from the um, what they call a PG era. It doesn't really
Oh,
engage you.
oh yes, and I think one of the main problems with WWE is I would say, way they're trying so hard to get that minority indie crowd that people like instead of actually going for that mainstream audience. And to me, when I look at, say, for example, the Viking Raiders, they seem to be on this path, but they just the name change. They were the Viking Experience, even though they were, the War Raiders or something in the NXT. Then they were the Viking Experience and the Viking Raiders. That tripped it up, but then they didn't really do anything. They had this feud with LC. They didn't really have any momentum going into with having the tag team championships, and that is worrying because you see that not only with Viking Raiders, but the Revival. I know they're very talented. If people in the past listen to my stuff, I said they're always talented, but I'm like, I just don't see the appeal for them. I don't see that type of, okay, that bombastic, like, okay, this is wrestling. What makes you important? What gives you attention? And all I see from, again, the Revival is we're just cosplaying the 80s and trying to be the brain busters. They're trying to be like Ole and Arn Anderson. They're trying to be that. And I'm like, you're not even like that. They're just the poor man's clone of that. And that's why they barely get any reaction at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and the problem is that that's something I learned from screenwriting is that WWE hasn't really answered the question of why should we care, and that's the big problem with Viking Raiders, and that's the big problem with the other team, is that they don't give you a reason to care about either of those teams or make you really engage with any of those teams. I mean, these guys have great wrestling talent and ability, but they just don't know how to book a lot of this talent, and they don't really know how to write the storylines for them. And one of the big problems that they have is that they just have not developed, allowed these characters to develop or grow organically due to WWE's approach to writing, which is they want to write everything for the wrestlers, whereas with AEW and NWA, they let the wrestlers come up with their own catchphrases, their own mic work, and they let them work the crowds, whereas WWE tries to control too much, as I see it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. WWE used to not do that. They used to listen to the fan bases, and even worse, I think when I look at WWE is that they just, I mean, they had good stories. For example, you look at, say, Kofi Kingston. That story when 11, and the thing is, even with that, they lucked into it because Ali, the wrestler that was supposed to be in the chamber match, got hurt, and Kofi Kingston came in with this 11-year story. They didn't work to that, and then, you know what? That was a really good moment. They built it to WrestleMania. Them and Daniel Bryan had one hell of a match. I think that was probably the best WrestleMania WWE Championship match I've seen in a long while. In fact, it's my running for Match of the Year and such. And the emotion, everything in that match was perfect. And in the feuds with Kofi Kingston later on, I don't think he actually lost a match. Rarely he lost a match. And I'm like, that, and he was always have that connection with the crowd because they saw him as a winner. He's a good guy, and he's outwitting the bad guys and heels until he faced Brock Lesnar. And, well, 10 seconds later, boom. And that's a shame because I knew he was going to lose to Lesnar. I think most people were going to be okay. He's going to lose to that, but the way it was, I didn't watch it. I was watching, I think the Nationals playoff game. I watched that. I knew it was going to be bad, but I didn't think it was going to be that bad. And what are your thoughts about that? The Kofi Kingston rise and then losing the title.
Well, I liked Kofi's rise. It was a very solid start to building something great. He could have been, one of the all-time great champions or with the great champions, but WWE didn't really care that much about Kofi, and it clearly showed in the way they booked his matches and the way they presented him as champ. I mean, he was a fighting champion, but they didn't really. It showed that they didn't really have the passion behind him, and they didn't really care too much about him. But the audience loved him, but WWE brass didn't really love him too much, and the way they did him at the premiere of SmackDown, that was something that really disgusted me because to literally squash a champion like that, that's just a real slap in the face to Kofi. And it was a real slap to all the WWE fans out there that were behind Kofi because he had gotten over with the fans and then they just bury him so that we can get another boring Brock Lesnar title run that no one really cares about, or a Rey Mysterio feud no one really cared about. And it showed that WWE really wasn't listening to the fans as related to Kofi. And now he's practically forgotten. And we're stuck with another mediocre Brock feud. And I just didn't like the way it was handled. And in some ways, I think that there is some racism in the WWE with the way that they are doing black wrestlers, because here you have a black wrestler who was over and they just buried him yet again.
Well, yeah, but then again, they've done that with wrestlers too. If you look at the
Yeah,
history, it's just, I think it's not, people have said the same thing. W hates women and black. I'm like, they might have their issues, but but when you look down to it, they booked their white male talent as crap. They booked their black talent as crap. They booked their
yeah,
Spanish as crap. They booked the women, so it's equality. It's equally crap, and
yeah.
that is it, and that's a shame. But that's WE for you, and it's a shame when people are looking at say, well, maybe Hunter and Triple H will Hunter and Triple H are gonna save day with NXT, and I'm just sitting there, I'm like, really, the NXT that is getting destroyed by AEW, that's your savior? And even then, it's become I don't know. Have you watched NXT in a while? Because I try watching it, and it's just I don't know. When you look at AEW and see the production, it reminds me so much of WCW. Of like, it's just to me. I don't know how you feel about this, but in my personal thing, I think it reminds me so much of that 96, 97, 98, WCW, that type of. When you hear professional wrestling, I point to that and say that's when I think of a professional wrestling. Everyone treats it like you have your wacky gimmicks and all that, but you treat it as that like it's like a sporting event. It feels like it's like okay, it has legitimacy behind it. And when I look at AEW, it has that same type of feeling, that sort of thing. But when I look at NXT, it feels like it's so it's trying to be like this small emotional indie part, that indie pro wrestling type of thing, like Ring of Honor, Impact Wrestling, that type of closed space. But it's like it's just like no, you're a $1 billion company, you know, spend some money on production. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying because AEW feels like a professional wrestling show. It feels like it pays respect to the athleticism and the entertainment together. And there's a lot, again, of passion and heart in their production. That's why it reminds you of 97, 98 WCW, because of the 97, 98 WCW, there was a lot of love for the craft of wrestling, and the performers came out there and they gave 100%. So you could see that there with NXT. It's like you're trying to do this small homemade thing, but it's just not really firing the way it should fire because you don't want to put enough money into it to make it what it is. They want to make it, keep it as small time, but it's time for these guys to grow over there and for them to invest a bit more money into NXT because they have the talent, but they just need the production
Mm,
values and they need the investment in the talent to give them that push to go to the next level.
I agree, but I think there's some of the talent that I think there's great. I think Velveteen Dream is great because he has that type of aura of like Goldust slash Macho Man, that type of aura to the crowd, a connection to it. And he's like 23 years old, and I'm like, this guy, if they don't screw him up, which WWE has the propensity to do, I'm like, this guy could be their next big star if they know what they're doing with him. Ciampa, I think he's good as well. Um, and Johnny Gargano, true baby face, 100% that type of character that you need in wrestling. That Sting, that Bret Hart, if you will. You need that type of moral guy there. But the group, I just really just, I want to hear your opinion on this. The Undisputed Era, which I understand their appeal, but when I look at it, I don't know. It's just I mean, I never liked Adam Cole when he was in Ring of Honor, but I give him a chance, and there's talent there. But you just like, I don't know. It just screams like we're trying to be indie and everything else, and meanwhile, it just doesn't fit with WWE. You know, it doesn't fit. That indie style doesn't fit with it. WWE is big, large, like comic book characters to me, and it's always has that.
Yeah.
Now it just feels like when you look at Undisputed Era, just like really these guys are dominating. I know I understand wrestling is a mix. You need these goes like hardcore, like the wrestlers, that sort of thing. You need that. I like that type of stuff too. But come on, man, I want something character driven, something like give me something other than just Adam Cole, baby. You understand, man? Just that sort of thing.
Yeah, it sounds like they're not these characters that they have over there aren't larger than life. And if you don't have larger than life characters in wrestling, then it's just not even worth watching. It's like there's no reason to care. And it looks like that gimmick they have is just a bland one. It just doesn't. It's not WWE level. It just doesn't pop enough.
Oh yeah, and speaking of WWE stuff, have you seen the Rusev Lashley angle? Any bit of it at all? Because I tried looking at it. I'm like, wow. Do we not? Do we not just need to have Lana cheating? Didn't we do this again over like a couple years ago with I believe with Dolph Ziggler, and now they're doing it with Lashley. I was like, and I just couldn't watch it anymore. Did you see any of that
I've seen the
on?
entire storyline and it's kind of boring. It's kind of been there, done that. Again, no reason to care for me to care about watching it. It's like filler for me.
Oh yeah. And meanwhile, like let's go to like NWA Power. I just recently watched the episodes. I mean, everything in that show feels mad. I mean, I care about Outlaw Incorporated. Eddie Kingston and Homicide getting another chance to get the tag team titles and such. Their chase for the tag team titles. I'm liking the way, for example, um, I like for like Tim Storm. That was amazing. That way, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I know what you're
Um,
talking about.
yeah, Tim Storm and all that stuff. To me, I was like, man, that was a good story. I feel like that was, and they're still continuing it. That's actually really good. And I think that what it looks like they might do something with, hopefully it's going to do something really good with that. Also, just the way they're doing with the ladies as well, the Rosa, all this stuff. It's intriguing. It's interesting. And I'm like, if this small company, NWA, with the history and stuff, and with the small, like, little thing here, the TV production and such, can do that, I just look at, the big time W, and I'm like, what are you doing? You know? I mean, it's not supposed to be that hard, but it seems to be really hard for them. I don't get it.
That's always been the problem with WWE for the last, I say, about 5, 10 years is they really are not strong on storytelling. I mean, even with a small company like NWA, it seems like they are more focused on the storytelling and they give you these characters that make you care. Like when I was watching that Tim Storm match you sent me a link to, I mean, almost immediately you're drawn into it and you could see this teacher who wrestles and they gave you a person you could care about and relate to, and they gave you a story with the heel that made you not like him but you could also respect him, and you could see that in the storytelling. Whereas in WWE, they they don't know how to create characters, and they of course they don't care about them. I mean, watching all three together, WWE, AEW, and NWA, I can say that NWA and AEW have way better storytelling, and that's because they know how to create better characters, and they know how to create people from being able to create great characters. A lot of wrestlers have angles they want to do and feuds they want to do, and then you have writers who they come up with stuff and they can't. And when they finally come up with something, he shuts it down and he just won't let any of the ideas flow, and that's why WWE shows are just so disjointed. Whereas on the other shows, the wrestlers have their hands in on things. They can cut their own promos. They can do their own. They can work on their own feuds. And again, it feels more organic. It feels like you can connect to people because people are working behind the scenes. It's not just some scripted entertainment and it feels forced. It just comes straight from the talent, and that's why it just feels so more alive.
Agreed. And it's just when you look at the shows and you feel the entertainment and such, is that it's the way it is. It's the way they connect with the people, and that's seems to be a lack of stuff, not just in WE but entertainment as well. That just a lack of connection to people. And speaking of things that have a lack of connection, the Terminator franchise. If you saw what happened to that thing, Dark Fate, which I'm like, well, I mean, talk about not having a connection with the audience, which is did not connect with the financial stuff. What I mean, what do you think? You look at Terminator Dark Fate and such. What was the reason why it didn't connect with the people and such?
Well, the main reason why Terminator Dark Fate didn't connect with the audience was because the producers were trying to force their social justice agenda on all of these Terminator fans who had been following this franchise for over 30 years. And the people who had been following this franchise, when we saw the trailer, we said that this just was not the Terminator we all knew. And this franchise just fell apart because once we started to see pictures of this woman Terminator and this whole narrative being changed, we said that this is just not the Terminator. No, we saw the uninspired storytelling that wasn't there. It just fell. The whole thing just fell apart. They were trying to force this strong woman agenda onto the Terminator franchise, and it didn't really need to be there because Sarah Connor was already a strong heroine, but they wanted to do the heroine their way, and they wanted to push their feminist identity politics
Oh,
at the
yeah.
expense of the Terminator story, and that alienated all of those Terminator fans out there who they came there to see the story of Sarah Connor protecting her son John Connor, and then when they came out and said, "Oh, John Connor gets killed in the first 5 minutes of the movie," that's when people who were on the fence just walked away, and that was because John Connor is core to the Terminator story, and if you kill John Connor, you just killed the whole franchise.
Well, yeah, and I think the reason why, and I watched it, I think there was some good parts in the movie, but the one thing I think that killed it was the multiple sequels of trying to make a trilogy over and over again, but yet not actually, getting to the core of what it is. And beyond that, and I watched it, and I'm like, they didn't really speak on anything of this whole stuff. They said automation. They had the whole Mexican border stuff, and I'm like, they have they had this part of it. They're gonna have something, but they don't say anything. They don't stick the landing about these stories. It's just like it's action set piece and action set piece that didn't build up. And you look at the first couple movies, you had chances to really follow the characters, really like the characters and stuff before the action. And I think that's the problem with most modern movies nowadays. They just want to get to the action, action, action. We need to get the action engaged instead of just, I mean, look at the first Terminator movie. They didn't really, they waited and waited. You had to like Sarah Connor and see what Kyle Reese is doing and see how, how her day and everything else. You build to that first um, the first things were terminated. But this movie, they just rushed it, and I think that's the main problem with this. It's just with movies in general in these days is that it just rush. There's no build
Well,
up to the characters,
well, the
man.
big problem with movies these days is that they are so busy trying to build and create franchises that story has gotten lost. And that's the big problem with most of these Hollywood films. They want to be able to make that new trilogy and say that they've made this trilogy of films, but what they don't understand is that you have to have a story. Now, I just got through writing a trilogy of books, the Spinsterella trilogy, and I can tell you, writing a trilogy is very hard, and you have to make these characters be compelling. You have to have a story that's compelling, and you have to make sure that each of those stories have their own beginnings, middles, and ends, and you have to make it connect together in a way that draws the reader and the audience in. But the big problem is that they're so busy focused on the dollars they want to make and making this multi-blockbuster film that they're not focusing on the characters and the story, and they're missing out on that question again of why should we care? Because when I was writing the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, I always asked the question, why should the audience care before I even started writing the outline? Because I understood that if you don't have the audience engaged, then they're not going to move from one book to the next because they need that reason to care. And the big problem is that they're over in Hollywood, all they're focusing on is the franchise, the characters, but they're not really focusing on that story and the character transformation arc that makes you want to care about these characters where you go from movie to movie. It's just all about stunts, special effects, and it just feels so manufactured because they just want to move to the next movie, but they don't want to give you a reason to go out and see the next movie. They don't want to give you that reason to care about these characters. That was something that George Lucas did with the Star Wars movies, was he gave you these great characters and made you care about them, and that was the thing that got you excited to the movie. But the Hollywood executives are moving to the next movie because they saw the success of things like the MCU. But even there, everything just felt so manufactured and the heart got lost. Whereas with George Lucas and the original trilogy, the heart never got lost. And that's something, as a writer, I know that you have to stay focused on,
Yeah.
is making sure that that story still has its heart and its spirit, because that's the thing that makes that story eventually become a classic because it resonates with the audience.
Yeah. You look at like the first two Terminator movies. There's heart there. There's story there. There's pathos. There's all these things. Um, but the one thing I did not I didn't like to see about you talk about the MCU. The MCU did have those stories, and they did connect, but it just along the way, some of them just feel like cash-ins. Some of them feel like, okay, we'll just put this thing there and not really have anything to do. Because there's so many characters in the Marvel they could do. I mean, I truly think there is a great story you could do with the version of Spider-Man they have. I don't think we have seen it yet. Captain Marvel, which I think was decent, but there's so much better stories that you can do with Captain Marvel and such. So much better stories. Better stories, I believe, can tell with all these other characters, but I think it's conveyor belt, and that's worrying to me. In that the Hollywood is looking at say, okay, we'll just make a conveyor belt movie instead of actually sitting down, writing a script, getting these things together. And it reminds me of a story that I think the people behind a Quiet Place told Disney and such, saying, no, we don't want to make another Star Wars movie. I don't want to make another uh, Indiana Jones. I want to be the making of we want to make the new Star Wars. They want to make the new Indiana Jones. They want to make these and I was like, finally, someone out there saying that. Because right now, it seems like there's a lot of directors and a lot of producers who are just okay with franchisement. They're okay with just saying, okay, it's a franchise. People care, that sort of thing. It's packaged in, and that's it.
Hollywood. epic historical movie and the musical. They just continued to just manufacture these movies off an assembly line back then. Unfortunately, audiences a different type of movie, and it sounds like Hollywood is in that exact same spot, and they're not really thinking about making movies with heart or energy or making original stories. It's just about let's make this sequel, let's make this remake, let's reboot this franchise, and not thinking about creating original characters. Because as I see it right now, this is the prime time to start creating some new characters because we have Generation Y, Generation Z, millennials, and they are not seeing their experiences on the screen the same way people growing up in the late 60s and early 70s, they were not seeing their experiences on screen. And it wasn't until Tom Laughlin came around with Born Losers and Melvin Van Peebles came out with Sweetback that we started to see um, are the people's experiences coming on screen, and films like The Godfather. That's when we started to really start to see people's experiences coming on screen, and this is something Hollywood isn't putting on screen because they're in a bubble. A lot of these studio executives, they're in their own world, and they're not giving us the world out here. Same thing with Marvel Comics. They're not giving us our world and our experiences. They say it's about outside your window, but I'm not seeing what I see outside my window on these movie screens or these TV screens or even in these comic books, and that's why a lot of this stuff is struggling because people they don't want another Star Wars. They want their own stories and they want their own experiences presented to them.
Yeah, I mean there is, and it's sad because again, Star Wars, not just in the movie side, because I think there was, I didn't like automatically hate the Last Jedi. I didn't hate that. I was like it was just mediocre and such. I don't, and and not only that, but I look at what Star Wars became. You got Rogue One, which was just. I honestly thought, and with good hands, I thought Rogue One would have been really great, but they made the characters forgettable and their actions and sacrifice was forgettable, and that to me that should have been a emotional rip to the gut, and that should have been that the Star Wars. I should have had that. You look at I feel like there's so many missed opportunities with Star Wars and such, and I hope episode 9 is good. Hopefully they're done filming by the time this podcast airs. They're not. They're probably reshooting everything else there, but I hope it's actually good in a way that cleans up the story. But right now, I don't think it will. But who knows? Hey, I hope it does. But yeah, I really think there's some good stuff for they should have more new IPs. There's stuff out there. I mean, there's stuff and stories out there that you can do in sci-fi and comedy movies and all that stuff. Heck, stuff like, for example, Dolomite is my name. I'm like, this stuff should be in theaters right now. It's that if you've seen it, it's great. I know you already saw it, but I highly recommend people see it if you listen to the podcast. I'm like, this is movies that you should. It tells a generation about how Dolomite became to be. That's to me really how one man put his vision out there and such, and that should be applauded in there. And you don't see that much in movies like that in Hollywood right now. There's nothing you can connect with that, and it's a shame.
Yeah, I'm all over the indie comic scene right now, and I'm seeing so much great stuff out here. I mean, I have backed a couple of Kickstarters and Indiegogos from guys like Josh Howard, who made T-Bird and Throttle, Shillum Jr. and Sergio Cada's Goth Miller has a great series with Chronicles of PA. There's so much great stuff out here, including my own stuff like the ISIS series, the East Team series, the John Haynes series. There's just so much great stuff out here on the indie market, but Hollywood doesn't want to tap that because they don't want to pay for it, and that's the big problem with Hollywood. That's why they keep mining this old properties, is they don't want to pay the new creators to come in because they know that now with intellectual properties being copyrighted and trademarked, they don't want to deal with the new creators because they have to pay for those intellectual properties. Moreover, they have to allow those creators to have creative control. So they can't push their identity politics with a lot of these new concepts because those new concepts they have their own mission. They already have a clear story, and what they can't push their narratives in those stories. But there's so much good stuff out there. I mean, like Mike Williams' Deke Sledge, he has a great script. So much great stuff out there. And if you go out to the indie sections of the comic book industry, the indie sections of publishing, you will see so much great stuff out there. And there's so much stuff you can't even read it all because it's just so much out there.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I have like one right now, EXO, The Legend of Wale Williams by Roy Okpoke. I can't pronounce his name. He basically did this really good comic book about about, and I believe, an African superhero, and I'm like, this stuff should be talked about, or like the other stories. And Legend of, need to find this more stuff, but there's always these comic books that would be perfect for this generation of like kids and young adults that would love to have these characters on screen, be it on Netflix, YouTube, Hulu, or whatever, Disney Plus or HBO Max. How many out of 10 billion streaming services? But there are so many of these ideas, and it's frustrating to see these ideas get pushed to the wayside. So we have to have a reboot of. Let me see. We should do that movie Chips. We'll do a reboot of the movie TV show Chips, or Charlie's Angels, which is I mean, why reboot Charlie's Angels? Why reboot these old franchises? If you're gonna push, I say, you know what? If you're gonna do identity politics and all these things, which I'm like, fine, make it at least your own, stand on your own 2 feet about them, talk about them, make it good and interesting, and the most important thing, make an original story. Find someone who's original story that follows this stuff and put it on screen. If you're so great with your convictions, why go into other established media and put this stuff in there? If you and any of your confident of your ideals and everything else, then put it out there, and you would find work that matches with your political stuff and put it up there. That's all I ask, because there's some are good and some are bad, but at least I'll say, hey, it's honest.
Transpose these social justice and identity because they're scared, they're insecure, and they're afraid of failure. That's why they push the feminist agenda on the Terminator Dark Fate, because they were just too insecure to go out here with an original character and push that stuff out. A lot of these people in Hollywood and the comic book industry, they're just scared to go out here and take a risk on an original character because they're afraid it'll fail. And that's the main reason why they keep trying to reboot these characters with new narratives, and then they wonder why they fail. But the reasons why they fail is because a lot of these characters they're producing, a lot of these stories they're producing have no substance, they have no depth, they have no heart. It's just somebody pushing agendas at you and preaching at you, and the audience does not want to be preached to. People go to watch movies, TV shows, comic books, sci-fi, and fantasy to escape, and they go to watch this stuff to take a break from their lives, and then all you want to do is bring them a problem. And in entertainment, you never bring people a problem, you bring them a solution. And these guys don't bring you solutions, they just keep yelling problems at you. So the audience has no incentive to watch this program because they don't want to be yelled at. They came to get away from people yelling at them. They want to escape problems and they want to find solutions. But when they watch this SJW stuff, it makes it where they just get disgusted because it's giving them more of what they do.
Agreed. And again, I think that if you're honest, and I believe that honesty works, and one thing I really don't like about the SJWs and all this other stuff is, again, if your product, if your ideas are actually good, stand up to it. I mean, say, hey, this stuff is important. I have like, again, most people do have like, you want your stuff in your entertainment is good and all, but you want to have look at some stuff again. Like for example, I look at, say, one day they did a really good job, like Captain America Winter Soldier. talked about the civilian state, premature war and all this type of stuff. And handled it great. I think that's you can do that type of thing and such. You can do it, but if you interwoven and tell about the story, you can do that. That's to me, if you can't do that, I mean, if you can do it and be entertaining and be true to the characters, that people have no problem with. But the problem with people with the SJWs or all this stuff is that they just can't. They're not that good enough storytellers. That's the thing. They're not good enough storytellers.
I'll agree with you on that. They are not good storytellers, and it shows in the way they present their stories and the way they execute their stories. It's just they focus so much on message that they just don't give you those characters that make you care. They don't give you a story that is compelling. And the big problem with these SJWs is that they make material that just it doesn't compel you to want to go see it. It's just when you think about Captain America the Winter Soldier, it's a great story because you see the characters, and that's because the writers there they had confidence and they believed in their work. And as a writer myself, I understand the difference between a story where the writer has confidence and believes in their work, because you see it on the page. Because when you have a writer who believes in their work, it's going to come across on the page, whereas you're just seeing the characters and the characters are coming to life. You're connecting with the characters, and that's because the writer believes in the story. I mean, for example, when I was writing Temptation of John Haynes back in 2005, I really believed in that story, and the message of the story were about how the road to salvation was a two-way street, and how the John Haynes character, while he was being tempted by the demon Easting was also being tempted by John Haynes to see a side of a good man. So she was seeing an example of Christ in John Haynes, and knew would show. I believed in the story so much that also on the page, and the book was so compelling, a 400-page book. I had people reading it in less than a day or 2 days, and that's because I believed in the story. When a writer believes in the story, it can come across on the page, and people will read it extremely quickly, and they'll really enjoy what they're reading. But when you have a SJW writer, they don't believe in what they're writing. They are all about their cause, and they're not really confident about their cause. They're just about preaching to people and shouting at people. Whereas a writer who's confident, when they present their material, they believe in it, and when you're reading it, you're compelled by it. And once you're compelled, you can see the points that they're making.
Yeah, and I think that's again, it's just the points about the story and such, and yeah, that's the most important thing is like I said, connection and storytelling. Storytelling. When you look back at WE, they're piss poor storytellers. You get the SCW, they're piss poor storytelling, and that to me is it's a connection of what it's sad to me that you have storytelling that's not really again connecting. And then there are, like I said, there are good storytellers that are happening right now, but it seems to me the bigger stories right now is that the storytellers, the people who are supposed to be storytellers, and such, is that they're not getting focused, they're not getting talked about, and I think there's so many good storytellers out there that what if they got that chance, they could make. I believe they could make that big movie or big TV series or something like that. Give them the opportunity, and they will say, "Hey, this is something entertaining and worthwhile to look at."
That's what I believe, because a lot of there's so much talent again at the bottom, and there are guys out there who are telling great stories, but they just can't get on the platforms because places like the publishing industry are pretty much controlled by feminists. Like on the trade publishing, it's pretty much controlled by feminists. So you can have a great story, but you just can't get it to the marketplace, and that's why so many authors out there and screenwriters are having a hard time. They have great material, but they have to use the indie routes like indie comics or print on demand, and you can only go but so far on those platforms because you just don't have the media machine to give you a push, and word of mouth is can only go but so far. But if a lot of those creators could get to a higher platform, they could reach more readers. For example, I did a book called Spellbound, and people love that book, but the whole thing is that I can only reach a certain group with that audience, because the can't reach the mainstream media platforms or get the distribution for retail outlets like Barnes and Noble to get in the stores, or places like the the other retail outlets. So if people can't see it, they can't find it. And I also get really positive feedback on ISIS series books and John Haynes series books online. But the whole thing is that if you can't get to the media platforms to really get the exposure, then people don't know about your product, and it makes it tougher to sell. I mean, you can only go but so far on places like YouTube and Facebook to promote, and I've been doing that for years. So again, a lot of talented guys like myself are out there, but the challenge is trying to reach the customers with it. The customers, when they find it, they love it, but the whole thing is trying to get to those platforms so that you can reach the customers.
Yeah, and the platforms are important, and that's the one thing I think. You look at what's going now, and all this stuff is, you look at what's happening in the streaming wars and stuff like that. They're looking for content, and my thing is, if once I think once the people get that chance of opportunity, you will see, for example, Luke Cage, Coker. I mean, he had the opportunity to write something really, take a character that no one really knew about and made it something so made it probably one of the biggest Netflix shows, right up there with Daredevil. And you see that type of stuff. I honestly believe that is, once you get these people and creative people behind these characters, you'll see something, again, shocking and wonderful, shocking, beautiful, wonderful, all these things, and challenging as well. Which again, I just I when I look at that, when I look, for example, with Disney, the Marvel stuff, I don't see that type of, like, oh my gosh, that type of stuff, that quality from like Luke Cage or Daredevil in any of those like shows. Maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I am, but the only time I've seen that is like Doom Patrol and Swamp Thing. Those are the two shows I think it can be really, they were really as good, if not good, than that type of quality. But when I look at Disney Plus, I just don't see that type of stuff. Maybe the Mandalorian and such like that. I can't pronounce words, but you understand what I'm trying to say, right? Is that the
Yeah, I understand.
quality? Yeah.
I understand because when I was watching Chio Coker's Luke Cage, it's like he took this character on to another level, and he took what he did with the character was he made it him his own distinct character. He captured the spirit of the comic books, but he made the character his own. I mean, when I look at Chio Coker's work, from things like Almost Human with Michael Ealy he did before that, he always had a fresh and distinct vision for whatever he produces. And what he did with Luke Cage is he took the character to another level. But when I look at the other Disney Plus programs, they don't really have that type of imagination or creativity. Usually, what they want to do is produce these generic cookie cutter programs like Kevin Feige wants to do. But Chio Coker, he really wanted to take this character to another level, and he wanted to make a commentary about black men, black manhood, black masculinity, and that's why the show resonated with so many people. But companies like Disney, these multinational conglomerates, they don't really want you to resonate anything with people. They just want bland, generic, by the numbers entertainment. They really don't want to make commentary, and that's why a lot of their stuff, it just doesn't
It's
really connect.
forgettable.
Yeah,
And
it's
that's a shame, because I look at something for the story, like if you look at, say, well, Captain Marvel. I mean, a story about like someone was trained to fight in a war that was she was lied about, and she calls like, oh my gosh, I was on the wrong side of a war, and not only that, I've caused the people I attacked to refugees, these type of things. And you look at that, you're like, that's a really deep story there, and there's something there, and dealing with their needs, all this type of stuff. There's something there, but it just feels like it's like, well, we'll touch on it barely. We'll touch just a smidge on it, and just have that type of, I would want to have that type of deep. I'm not saying you can have, like I said, look at Winter Soldier. You look at, say, Guardians of the Galaxy, all this type of stuff. Like, you can have some good commentary about some things, with Guardians of the Galaxy is how misfits coming together and that sort of thing, and then you have, like I said, Winter Soldier with all this stuff it talked about, but also be very fun and entertaining. This, when you look at like Captain Marvel, it's something that could have been, like I said, it's forgettable. It goes in and you just walk away from it and you don't really have anything to say, which I just don't. I hate seeing that in movies and characters. It's fine for popcorn entertainment, but don't point it out and saying it's the greatest thing ever, or saying it's like right up there with Godfather or something, which is ugh, that sort of stuff.
You can't really say that this is on the MCU movies like Captain Marvel on the level of Godfather, because that was a film that was making a social commentary about family, and it was a totally different cinematic experience, and that's the big problem with a lot of these cookie cutter things, that they're trying to make it like this is supposed to be a classic. But what made those films the classics, like Godfather, Marty, and many others, Sunset Boulevard, was that they weren't afraid to make social commentary between the lines. And we're not getting that with a lot of these things like MCU films, because all they want to do is give you this popcorn entertainment, not understanding that popcorn entertainment is two dimensional, whereas great cinema that makes social commentary is really, it's on a whole nother level. I mean, in order to really understand that type of material, you have to study that material. Like I would study stuff like Rod Serling's Twilight Zones, or Gene Roddenberry's Have Gun Will Travel episodes, or his episodes of Star Trek, because those really showed us how you can make that social commentary in science fiction and fantasy. And a lot of people I'm seeing, they're not really studying the material to understand how the story works or the mechanics of the story work. And that's why we're getting these shallow, really weak sci-fi and fantasy movies that really have no heart and don't really resonate with the audience.
Yeah, and but I always look in the positive direction. I mean, when you look at, say, we talked earlier about pro wrestling and see how that is changing and such, and how the good stuff, AEW, NWA, and such, are getting people opportunity and talent. I truly believe in years from now we're gonna look and say, hey, maybe it will be a trickle up or down effect in the other realms of entertainment and such, like saying, hey, maybe they will finally get that chance to actually change, like get a chance, people get an opportunity to show their real the real talent and storytelling, and become great storytellers themselves. And I hope that happens for you, Mr. Yeah. But anyway, do you were talking an email about like ISIS, having a wrestling, a story about pro wrestling in the ISIS series. So you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, next year I'm going to be doing an ISIS series story called ISIS Main Event, and this is where the story where the goddess next door steps into the squared circle. And I wrote this story because I have been a wrestling fan ever since I was 11 years old in the mid 1980s, and I watched the first WrestleMania on videotape. I used to watch Saturday Night's Main Event. I've actually seen the wrestling business over the last 30, 35 years. And this story was a tribute to all of those great wrestling shows I used to watch. I mean, I've watched everything from WWF in the rock and wrestling era, WCW's early days, Glow, Gorgeous Women of Wrestling, the Attitude Era, NWO, at the um, what they call ruthless aggression era. I watched all that stuff, and with this story, I wanted to pay a tribute to those wrestlers and all the hard work that they put in. Because when I look at wrestling, it reminds me a lot of superheroes, and it reminds me a lot of mythology. So I could see the comparison, the parallels between comic books, wrestling, and mythology, because these we have these larger than life godlike characters who are in these epic battles. And with this story, I wanted to show how the goddess next door, when she steps into this squared circle in this feud that she's having with the Greek goddess Nemesis, this is the story that is the turning point for the Isis character and her character transformation arc. And it's the conclusion of a trilogy of stories that I was doing with the ISIS character. The first one was The Ultimate Fight, which was about the world of ultimate fighting and the UFC, sort of a UFC type organization. The second one was Power of the Princess, which was the turning point for the Nemesis character in her transformation arc. And this was the conclusion of Nemesis's storyline with ISIS, and it shows how both characters grew as a result of them dealing with the issues that they were having as related to being goddesses. And it all ties into the world of wrestling because they're wrestling with stuff internally as they're working on this feud in this dangerous divas of wrestling. And that book is one that I'm really passionate about putting together because I've been wrestling for 30 years and I wanted people who put on those great shows over the last. And I wanted this story to show people, that the world of wrestling, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and I go over different things that go on behind the scenes. I use a lot of wrestling lingo in the book, and I wanted to show people, how things go in the business of wrestling in this story. And I wanted to make something that was easy to read for all readers of all ages so they could understand the wrestling business and they could see the goddess next door come to that turning point in her own character transformation arc.
Oh yeah, that's sounds really good and very interesting as well. And by the way, when the link to your YouTube channel and such will be in the description when I put this on YouTube. Thank you once again for joining me, Shawn James. You're for talking wrestling, a little bit of entertainment on the side as well. And again, this was a great experience. And once again, thank you, and thank for everyone who's listening.
Thank you for having me on the show.
All right, no problem. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Next week we'll be back into the regular stuff here. And by the way, Shawn, you're welcome back anytime to the lounge. And
I,
also, sorry. All right.
I'll be glad to come on again.
All right, and not only that, but also a little bit of house cleaning here. Next review will be on the new Nintendo Switch Astral Chain and the streaming, the video streaming and such will be back tomorrow, but Thursday and such will be on Thursday and Friday. Will be on Odd World Stranger's Wrath on Thursday, and on Friday we'll be going back into the world of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. It's Dukect here. Peace and love. I will see y'all when I see y'all later.